I'll never forget the exact moment my world shifted. It wasn't when I overheard Greg laughing with Andrew at our annual Christmas party, the sound drifting from his study where they'd retreated with expensive scotch and Cuban cigars. It was what he said that changed everything. Becky, she's just a simple housewife, brilliant with the kids and dinner parties, but she wouldn't understand what we're doing with Summit. She majored in art history, for God's sake. The dismissive chuckle that followed made my blood run cold as I stood frozen outside the door, tray of canapés in hand. 12 years of marriage, 2 children, and the MBA I'd been quietly completing. At night while Greg traveled for business, all reduced to just a simple housewife. The worst part wasn't even the words themselves. It was the realization that this wasn't a momentary lapse or a show of bravado for his business partner. This was how my husband truly saw me. I placed the tray on the sideboard, straightened my festive red dress, and walked away without making my presence known. That night, as guests mingled in our meticulously decorated Cherry Creek home, the home I'd designed and managed while Greg built Summit Technologies, a plan began to form in my mind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony of Greg's dismissal was that I knew more about Summit Technologies than he realized. During our marriage, I'd listened to every business challenge, every strategic pivot, every staffing issue. While preparing dinner, I'd offered suggestions that Greg later presented as his own brilliant insights at board meetings. I'd entertained clients, remembering their children's names and personal details that helped secure million-dollar contracts, all while being introduced as my wife Becky, with that particular tone that suggested my contributions ended at the perfect roast chicken. What Greg had forgotten, or perhaps never knew, was that before we met, I'd worked in venture capital. I'd left my promising career when we relocated to Denver for his opportunity, a decision we'd framed as, what's best for our future family. Over the years, that temporary pause had somehow calcified into a permanent identity in Greg's mind. Becky the housewife, Becky the dinner party hostess, Becky who couldn't possibly understand business strategy. The morning after the Christmas party, I sat at our kitchen island with a cup of coffee, watching snow fall on our perfectly landscaped backyard. Greg was already gone, an early meeting downtown that couldn't wait, even though it was Saturday. The house was quiet, with our children visiting my sister Kate in Colorado Springs for the weekend. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Summit Technologies financial reports Greg had carelessly left accessible on our shared home network. For months, I'd been noticing subtle changes in Greg's behavior. More late nights, more business trips, more hushed phone calls. My first suspicion had been an affair, the classic midlife crisis of a successful man approaching 45. But as I scrolled through the documents, a different picture emerged. Summit was in trouble. Their primary product line was becoming obsolete as the industry shifted, and their new initiatives were bleeding money. Greg and Andrew had been shuffling funds between accounts, painting a rosy picture for their board while frantically searching for new investment. I closed the laptop and reached for my phone, sending a text to Eleanor Martinez. We'd met in my MBA program. She was an adjunct professor who'd become a mentor and friend. Coffee today. Need some advice. Her response came quickly. Mountain brew at 1 p.m. Everything okay? I didn't answer that question. I wasn't sure of the answer myself. Eleanor listened without interruption as I laid out the situation over steaming mugs in the corner of the bustling cafe. At 62, she had navigated the male-dominated tech industry for decades, building and selling 2 successful companies before semi-retiring to teach and consult. So, what exactly do you want, Rebecca? She asked when I finished, using my full name as she always did when discussing serious matters. To save your husband's company? To make him recognize your value? Or something else entirely? I stirred my coffee, watching the cream create swirling patterns. I want what I've always wanted, to build something meaningful, I've spent 12 years helping Greg build his dream while putting mine on hold. I don't think I can do that anymore." Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. Summit's vulnerabilities could be opportunities if you're looking at them from the outside. "What do you mean?" "Their client relationships are solid, their team is strong, and their reputation is still excellent. Their problem is product direction and cash flow. If someone with vision acquired Summit before the market realizes they're struggling..." "You think I should try to buy my husband's company?" The idea seemed absurd as soon as I said it aloud. Eleanor smiled, the fine lines around her eyes crinkling. "I think you should consider all your options before deciding what you want your next chapter to look like." That conversation planted a seed, one that grew rapidly over the following weeks as I gathered information and assessed resources. I had inheritances from both my grandparents that I'd invested conservatively over the years, contrary to Greg's advice to let him put it to work in riskier ventures. I had my MBA network. I had Eleanor's guidance. And most importantly, I had knowledge of Summit's true position that few others possessed. I set up a meeting with Daniel Chen, a financial advisor Eleanor recommended. I explained my situation without revealing Summit's identity, framing it as a potential acquisition of a distressed tech consultancy. "The timing would be crucial," Daniel explained, reviewing the numbers I'd provided. "Too early and you'll overpay. Too late and there won't be enough value left to salvage." "How would I structure this without immediately revealing my identity?" I asked. "I need time to assess the company thoroughly before making my connection known." Daniel tapped his pen against his notepad. "We could create an acquisition vehicle, a holding company with you as the majority shareholder, but with a management team as the public face during initial negotiations." I nodded, thinking of the small group of trusted contacts I'd been quietly assembling. "I'd need legal counsel. I can recommend someone discreet. This situation is unusual." "My whole life is unusual at the moment," I replied with a wry smile. "I might as well embrace it." Olivia Patel of Goldstein, Patel and Associates became the third member of what I now thought of as my war council. Her office, with its panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains, felt worlds away from my kitchen, where I'd spent countless hours planning Greg's business dinners. "The approach needs to be carefully orchestrated," Olivia advised after reviewing the situation. "Your husband doesn't know you're aware of Summit's financial situation?" "He has no idea. He thinks I'm planning a charity fundraiser and taking tennis lessons." The corner of my mouth twitched at the absurdity of it all. "Keep it that way for now. We'll establish Pinnacle Solutions as the acquisition vehicle. You'll be listed in the ownership documents filed with the state, but we can structure it so that all communications come through the management team." "Won't Greg recognize my name in the paperwork once things progress?" Olivia smiled. "We'll use your maiden name, Rebecca Morgan. From what you've told me about how your husband sees you, I doubt he'll make the connection until we want him to." She was right about that. In the years since our wedding, I'd become Becky Wilson in all aspects of my life. Rebecca Morgan, the ambitious analyst who'd caught Greg's attention at a finance conference in Chicago, hadn't existed for him in a long time. As January turned to February, my plan accelerated. I explained my frequent absences to Greg as committee meetings for the children's school and sessions with a personal trainer, activities he had no interest in discussing. He was too preoccupied with Summit's growing crisis, coming home later each night, tension etched in the lines of his face. "Everything okay at work?" I asked one evening, placing his dinner in the warming drawer for the third time that week. "Just the usual challenges of growth," he replied dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about." I bit my tongue, nodded sympathetically, and returned to reviewing acquisition projections on my tablet, disguised with a cookbook app that I quickly switched to when Greg glanced my way. The first direct contact between Pinnacle Solutions and Summit Technologies came in early March. Jason Foster, a key developer I knew was frustrated with Summit's direction, agreed to meet with Pinnacle's talent acquisition team, actually, a consultant friend of Eleanor's. The information he provided confirmed what I'd suspected. Morale was plummeting as rumors of financial trouble spread, and several key team members were updating their resumes. Greg mentioned the meeting at dinner that night, unaware of my involvement. Some new player in town is trying to poach our people. Anderson says they're asking specific questions about our infrastructure and client contracts. That sounds concerning, I replied, passing him the salad. Do you know who's behind it? Some company called Pinnacle Solutions, probably one of those overnight operations trying to make a quick mark. He shrugged. They won't get far. Our team is loyal. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral while my heart raced. I'm sure you're right. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next phase was more direct. Using the professional connections I'd maintained quietly over the years, I arranged for Pinnacle to be invited to bid on a major contract that Summit was counting on to stabilize their cash flow. When Greg mentioned the unexpected competition at the bidding stage, I suggested that perhaps he should learn more about this new rival. That's actually smart thinking, Becky, he said, sounding mildly surprised. I'll have Megan research them tomorrow. I knew what his assistant would find: a newly established consulting firm with impressive credentials and a management team of industry veterans, backed by unnamed investors interested in expanding in the Denver market. What she wouldn't find, unless she dug much deeper than Greg would authorize, was my connection to it all. The pressure on Summit intensified when Pinnacle won the contract with a bid that was precisely calibrated to be attractive, but not suspiciously low. I watched from the sidelines as Greg and Andrew scrambled to reassure their board and secure bridge financing to cover mounting expenses. I don't understand how they knew exactly what to offer, Greg complained during a rare weekend at home. It's like they had inside information about our bid. I passed him a beer and sat beside him on our patio. Maybe they just understand the market better than you expected. He scoffed. Impossible. We've been in this space for 15 years. Sometimes fresh eyes see things differently, I suggested. Maybe they're not bound by the same assumptions. Greg dismissed this with a wave of his hand. You don't understand how this industry works, Becky. No, I agreed quietly. I suppose I don't. By late April, Summit's position had deteriorated further. A planned round of investment fell through when 2 board members expressed concerns about the company's direction. Greg was working 18-hour days, and the strain was showing in his haggard appearance and short temper. I maintained my supportive wife facade while finalizing Pinnacle's acquisition strategy with my team. Summit will need to consider acquisition offers soon, Daniel Chen predicted during our weekly meeting. They're approaching the point where they can't meet payroll without significant new investment. Are we ready? I asked, reviewing the latest financial projections. Pinnacle's position is solid. The contract revenue is flowing, and our backing is secure. The question is, are you ready, Rebecca? I thought about Greg's dismissive words at the Christmas party, about 12 years of having my intelligence and capabilities minimized, about the dreams I'd deferred. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready. Olivia drafted the initial acquisition offer, carefully crafted to be attractive to Summit's increasingly nervous board while protecting Pinnacle's interests. The letter was delivered on a Tuesday morning. I knew because Greg called me from his office, his voice tight with stress. Someone just offered to buy the company, he said without preamble. Some outfit called Pinnacle Solutions. The ones... Who won that contract? I asked innocently. Are they offering a good price? That's not the point, Becky. This is my company, my legacy. I'm not selling to some unknown entity that's been deliberately undermining us. I could picture him pacing his corner office, running his hand through his hair as he always did when frustrated. "What does Andrew think?" I asked. There was a pause. "Andrew thinks we should consider it. So does the board." "Maybe you should at least meet with them," I suggested gently. "Find out who's behind the offer." "Fine," he snapped, but only to figure out how to fight back. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon at Goldstein, Patel and Associates, neutral ground selected by Olivia. I arrived an hour early, entering through the private elevator to avoid any chance of an early encounter with Greg. Eleanor and Daniel joined me in the conference room, reviewing our strategy one final time. "You're sure about this?" Eleanor asked, studying my face. "There's no going back once Greg knows." "I'm sure," I replied, smoothing the jacket of my charcoal gray suit. Not my usual style, but perfect for Rebecca Morgan, majority owner of Pinnacle Solutions. "It's time." Greg arrived with Andrew and their corporate attorney, all three looking grim and defensive as they took seats across the large mahogany table. Olivia made introductions but did not immediately reveal my presence in the adjoining room, where I watched through one-way glass. Daniel presented Pinnacle's offer professionally, outlining the benefits to Summit's employees and clients. The proposed purchase price was fair, enough to satisfy the board and investors, but reflecting Summit's true financial position rather than Greg's inflated valuation. "This is a hostile takeover," Greg argued, leaning forward aggressively. "You've deliberately targeted our clients and employees." "We prefer to see it as a strategic alignment of complementary resources," Daniel replied calmly. "Pinnacle has the capital and fresh direction Summit needs. Summit has the established client relationships and talented team that Pinnacle values." "And who exactly is Pinnacle?" Greg demanded. "Who's behind this?" Daniel glanced toward the mirrored wall, my cue. I took a deep breath, opened the connecting door, and stepped into the conference room. The shock on Greg's face would have been comical under different circumstances. "Becky?" he sputtered. "What are you doing here?" "It's Rebecca, actually," I corrected, taking a seat at the head of the table. "Rebecca Morgan Wilson, majority shareholder of Pinnacle Solutions." Andrew's mouth literally fell open. Greg's face flushed dark red. "This is a joke," he said flatly. "I assure you it's not," Olivia interjected, sliding documents across the table. "As you can see, Mrs. Wilson's credentials and ownership are fully documented." "You've been spying on Summit," Greg accused, his voice rising, "using our marriage to steal proprietary information." I shook my head. "I've never accessed anything that wasn't available on our home network, where you left confidential documents unsecured, I might add. Everything else, Pinnacle has obtained through legitimate business channels." "You can't do this, Becky," Greg insisted, emphasizing the diminutive name. "You're my wife." "Yes," I agreed. "I am. I'm also a businesswoman with an MBA and 15 years of experience in finance and strategic planning. Experience you've chosen to ignore and dismiss for the entirety of our marriage." Andrew, recovering from his initial shock, leaned forward with calculating interest. "The offer is actually quite reasonable, Greg. Better than we're likely to get if word of our cash position gets out." Greg shot him a look of betrayal. "Whose side are you on?" "The side of financial reality," Andrew replied wearily. "We're weeks away from missing payroll. The board is already considering replacing you as CEO. This could be the best outcome available." Greg stared at me as though seeing a stranger, his familiar face contorted with a mixture of shock, anger, and something I'd rarely witnessed in our marriage: uncertainty. He glanced between the acquisition documents and my composed expression, clearly struggling to reconcile the wife he thought he knew with the businesswoman sitting confidently at the head of the conference table. "We need to discuss this privately," he finally managed, pushing back from the table. "Becky, Rebecca, whatever you're calling yourself now, this is between us." "There's nothing about this acquisition that requires a private discussion," I replied evenly. "This is a business meeting, Greg. The offer from Pinnacle Solutions is straightforward and addresses the concerns your board has already raised about Summit's direction. Andrew cleared his throat, glancing uncomfortably between us. She's right, Greg. Given our financial position, we should at least consider— Shut up, Andrew, Greg snapped, not taking his eyes off me. You have no idea what's happening here. I maintained my composure, though my heart was racing beneath my tailored blazer. What's happening is that Pinnacle Solutions has identified an acquisition opportunity that makes strategic sense. Your board will receive the same presentation you've just seen, and they'll make their decision based on what's best for Summit's shareholders, employees, and clients. Greg's attorney, a silver-haired man I'd met at numerous company functions, but who now looked at me with wary reassessment, leaned in to whisper something. Greg shook his head sharply. You've deliberately undermined my company, he accused, color high in his cheeks. You've used information from our marriage to orchestrate this coup. That's simply not true, Olivia interjected smoothly. Mrs. Wilson has been meticulous about ensuring all actions taken by Pinnacle Solutions fall well within legal and ethical boundaries. The fact that you didn't recognize your wife's capabilities or take basic precautions with confidential information doesn't constitute wrongdoing on her part. The room fell silent. I could almost see Greg's mind racing as he tried to identify his best move in a game he hadn't known we were playing. He'd always prided himself on being 3 steps ahead, on seeing the angles others missed. Now he was scrambling to catch up. You won't get away with this, he finally said, gathering his papers. The board knows me. They trust me. I built Summit from nothing. We built Summit, I corrected quietly. Every client dinner I hosted, every crisis. I talked you through every suggestion I made that you presented as your own. I was building Summit too. You just refused to see it. Something flickered in Greg's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the first inkling of doubt. But it vanished quickly behind a mask of determination as he stood. This meeting is over. Andrew, let's go. I need to call an emergency board session. Andrew hesitated, looking between Greg and me with clear calculation in his eyes. Always the pragmatist, Andrew Thompson had survived in business by identifying the winning side and aligning himself accordingly. Actually, he said slowly, I think I'd like to hear more about Pinnacle's transition plan for existing management. If you don't mind, Greg. The betrayal hit Greg visibly. His shoulders stiffened, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Fine, he bit out. Stay. Listen to whatever fantasy she's selling. I'll be speaking with our investors. He stalked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle, turning back to look at me with narrowed eyes. I don't know who you think you've become, but this isn't over. After the door closed behind him, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Andrew leaned forward, his expression openly curious now. So, Rebecca, I should probably start using that name, shouldn't I? How long have you been planning this? Planning implies predetermination, I replied. Let's say instead that I recognized an opportunity and had the resources to act on it. Now, shall we discuss Pinnacle's vision for Summit's integration? For the next hour, we outlined the acquisition strategy in detail. Andrew asked sharp, practical questions, his initial shock giving way to professional assessment. By the time we concluded, he seemed resigned to the inevitable. Greg won't go quietly, he warned as we gathered our materials. He's always defined himself by Summit's success. Without it. I'm well aware of who Greg is, I said. Better than most, I would think. Andrew nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose you are. He paused. For what it's worth, he should have listened to you years ago. That strategy you suggested for the Westridge account, the one Greg presented as his own, it saved the entire relationship with the client. I allowed myself a small smile. I know. As I left the law offices with my team, Denver's spring afternoon sunshine felt especially bright. Eleanor walked beside me, her expression thoughtful. "The hard part is just beginning," she cautioned as we reached her car. "Corporate acquisitions are complicated, even without personal entanglements." "I'm prepared," I assured her, though the weight of what I'd set in motion was settling on my shoulders. This wasn't just about business strategy anymore. I had publicly challenged not only Greg's company, but the entire foundation of our marriage. My phone began ringing almost immediately after I returned home. I ignored the calls from Greg, from his parents, from couples we socialized with who had undoubtedly heard rumors already. Instead, I called my sister Kate. "You did what?" she exclaimed when I explained the situation. "Rebecca, I don't even know what that is. Bold doesn't begin to cover it." "I know it seems dramatic," I acknowledged, kicking off my heels and curling up on the window seat that overlooked our carefully landscaped garden. But it felt like the only way forward that I could live with. "What about the kids?" Kate asked, always practical. "How will this affect them?" I sighed, watching a hummingbird hover near the feeder I'd hung last weekend. One of countless small touches I'd added to make this house a home while Greg focused on his business. They're 16 and 14, not babies. They know their father. Sees my contributions as secondary. I won't allow them to grow up thinking that's normal or acceptable. Kate was silent for a moment. "You know I'm on your side, right? Always have been. I've watched you shrink yourself to fit into Greg's idea of who you should be. But are you ready for how ugly this might get?" "No," I admitted. "But I'm less ready to spend another decade being underestimated and dismissed." After we hung up, I sat watching the sunset paint Colorado's sky in spectacular oranges and pinks. The house felt strangely peaceful despite the storm I knew was coming. I'd lived so long in the shadow of Greg's ambitions that stepping into my own light felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The sound of the garage door opening broke my reverie. Greg was home earlier than I'd expected. I steeled myself, remaining seated as his footsteps approached, heavier than usual, angry. He appeared in the doorway, tie loosened, face flushed, in a way that suggested he'd been drinking. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Hello to you too," I replied calmly. "Would you like a drink? This conversation might go better with one." "Don't patronize me," he growled, pacing the living room. "You've been living some kind of double life, plotting against me, and you want to offer me a drink like nothing's happened?" I folded my hands in my lap, maintaining the composure I'd practiced for this moment. "I haven't been plotting against you, Greg. I've been building something for myself while you were busy dismissing me as just a simple housewife." "Your words, not mine." He stopped pacing, confusion momentarily replacing anger. "What are you talking about?" "The Christmas party. You and Andrew in your study. You didn't know I was outside the door when you explained how your brilliant but unworldly wife couldn't possibly understand your business challenges." Recognition dawned on his face. "You overheard a private conversation and decided to destroy my company over it? That's insane, Rebecca." "What's insane is spending 12 years being treated like an accessory rather than a partner," I countered, rising to face him. "What's insane is watching you take credit for my ideas while introducing me as the wife to people whose contracts I helped you secure. What's insane is finally completing my MBA while raising our children and managing this household, only to hear you dismiss my entire existence as something cute and domestic." Greg ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times, when he was strategizing. "So this is revenge? You're punishing me for not praising you enough?" "This isn't about praise," I said, frustration finally seeping into my voice. "This is about respect, recognition, the basic acknowledgement that I have value beyond hosting your dinner parties and raising your children." "By stealing my company?" He laughed bitterly. "That's your idea of earning respect?" I'm not stealing anything. Pinnacle Solutions is making a legitimate offer based on Summit's actual market value, which, by the way, is significantly less than what you've been telling your board. If you'd been honest with your investors about the company's position, you wouldn't be in this situation. Greg's expression hardened. The board won't accept your offer. They trust me. 3 board members have already indicated they're open to the acquisition, I replied, watching his confidence falter. They're business people, Greg. They'll do what makes financial sense, not what preserves your ego. You've thought of everything, haven't you? He said quietly, studying me with unfamiliar intensity. All this time I never realized. That's precisely the problem, I finished for him. You never realized. A tense silence stretched between us, the weight of 12 years of mutual misunderstanding filling the elegant living room I'd so carefully designed to project exactly the image Greg wanted: successful, traditional, unthreatening. "Where are the kids?" he finally asked, glancing toward the quiet hallway leading to their bedrooms. "With Kate for the weekend. I thought it would be better to have this conversation without them here." He nodded, some of the fight seeming to drain from him as he sank onto the sofa. "What happens now? With us, I mean. Is this your way of ending our marriage?" The question caught me off guard. In all my strategic planning, I'd focused on the business implications rather than the personal ones. "I don't know," I admitted. I hadn't thought that far ahead. "That's not like you," he observed with unexpected perspicacity. "The Rebecca I saw today plans everything down to the smallest detail. Perhaps you don't know me as well as you think you do." Evidently not. He looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Was any of it real? Our marriage? The question stung more than I'd anticipated. Of course it was real, Greg. I loved you. I hesitated, no longer certain what I felt. I believed in us, in our partnership, but somewhere along the way you stopped seeing me as your equal. "That's not fair," he protested. "I've always valued what you do for our family." "Valued, perhaps, but not respected," I clarified. "There's a difference between appreciating someone's contributions and acknowledging their capabilities." Greg fell silent, contemplating my words with unusual thoughtfulness. The man who always had a quick retort seemed genuinely at a loss. My phone chimed with a message from Olivia. "Thompson reached out. Wants to discuss transition plans. Board meeting confirmed for Monday." Greg noticed my expression change. "Work?" he asked with a hint of irony. "Yes," I admitted, setting the phone aside. "But it can wait." He laughed without humor. The great Rebecca Morgan, putting business on hold for a personal conversation. Will wonders never cease. "That's unfair," I said quietly. "I've spent our entire marriage putting your business first, arranging my schedule around your meetings, entertaining your clients, being available whenever you needed a sounding board. Don't rewrite history because you're angry now." Something in my tone must have penetrated his defensiveness because his expression softened slightly. "You're right," he conceded. "That was uncalled for." He stood, straightening his wrinkled shirt with an attempt at dignity. "I need time to think, to figure out my next move." "This isn't a chess match, Greg." "Isn't it?" he countered. "You made your play. Now I need to make mine." He headed toward the hallway, then paused. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow I'll find somewhere else to stay until we figure this out." After he disappeared upstairs, I remained in the living room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my husband moving through our home like a visitor. The enormity of what I'd set in motion finally hit me fully. There would be no going back to the life we'd built together, regardless of how the acquisition proceeded. I had stepped out of the role Greg had assigned me, and neither of us could unsee the truth that had been revealed. The weekend passed in a strange, tense dance of avoidance. Greg spent most of Saturday secluded in his home office, making calls and sending emails with grim determination. I reviewed Pinnacle's strategy, with my team via video conference from my car, parked at a scenic overlook in Boulder, where I could be certain of privacy. By Sunday evening, when the children returned home full of stories from their weekend with Kate, Greg and I had established an uneasy truce, presenting a united front while barely speaking to each other. Monday arrived with the crisp clarity of a Colorado spring morning. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit that I'd purchased specifically for this phase of Pinnacle's emergence. Professional, commanding, but not trying too hard to imitate traditional male business attire. As I fastened my grandmother's pearl earrings, I caught Greg watching me from the doorway of our bedroom. "The board meeting is at 10, he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Will you be there?" "My team will present Pinnacle's offer," I replied, applying a subtle layer of lipstick. "I thought it best to give you space to make your case without the personal complications." He nodded, studying me with that same disconcerting intensity he'd shown since Friday's revelation. "You really have changed. Or maybe you were always this person and I just didn't see it." "A bit of both, perhaps," I acknowledged, turning to face him. "Good luck with your presentation, Greg." A flicker of surprise crossed his face at my sincerity. "You too," he said after a moment. "May the best business plan win." The Summit Technologies board meeting lasted 3 hours. I received periodic updates from Olivia, who observed the proceedings as Pinnacle's representative. Greg made an impassioned case for rejecting our offer, presenting an alternative restructuring plan that promised to address the company's weaknesses without surrendering control. Andrew, in a surprising display of political adaptability, positioned himself carefully between the opposing sides, highlighting concerns with Greg's plan while suggesting modifications to Pinnacle's offer. When Olivia finally called with the board's decision, I was reviewing financial projections with Daniel in Pinnacle's modest temporary offices in Lodo. "They've accepted our offer in principle," she reported, her professional tone not quite masking her satisfaction. "With 2 conditions: accelerated timeline for capital infusion and guaranteed positions for key technical staff through the transition." "Both acceptable," I confirmed, exchanging a significant look with Daniel. "What about leadership?" There was a slight pause. Greg has been asked to stay on as a consultant during the transition period, 3 months maximum. After that, leadership structure will be at Pinnacle's discretion. I processed this information, considering its implications both professionally and personally. "Has he agreed?" "Not yet," Olivia replied. "He asked for 24 hours to consider his options." After ending the call, I stood by the window, overlooking downtown Denver, watching people hurry along the sidewalks below, ordinary lives untouched by the seismic shift occurring in mine. Daniel approached quietly, respecting my moment of reflection. "Congratulations," he said simply. "You've achieved what you set out to do." Had I? The question lingered as I drove home that evening. The acquisition had been my immediate goal, yes, but what came next? I hadn't planned beyond this moment, beyond proving that I could succeed in the world Greg had always treated as exclusively his domain. The house was dark when I arrived. No sign of Greg's car in the driveway. The children were at their respective activities, basketball practice for our son, debate team for our daughter, and wouldn't be home for hours. I moved through the quiet rooms, removing my suit jacket and heels, transforming back into the version of myself that had inhabited this space for years. My phone rang as I was pouring a glass of wine. Greg's number. "Yes," I answered, unsure what to expect. "The Summit Board accepted your offer," he said without preamble, his voice tight but controlled. "I know. Olivia called me." "Of course she did." He fell silent for a moment. "I'm at the copper room. I think we should talk, really talk, about what happens next." The copper room had been where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary 2 years ago. The choice of location seemed deliberately significant. "I can be there in 30 minutes. I agreed. Greg was waiting at a corner table when I arrived, nursing what appeared to be a scotch, neat. He stood as I approached, an old-fashioned courtesy he'd always maintained. "Thank you for coming," he said formally, as though we were meeting for a business dinner, rather than attempting to navigate the wreckage of our personal and professional lives. I sat across from him, accepting the glass of Cabernet he'd already ordered for me. "How are you?" I asked, genuine concern breaking through my carefully maintained composure. He laughed shortly. "How do you think? My wife has orchestrated a takeover of the company I've spent 15 years building. My board has essentially fired me, and my business partner has revealed himself to be an opportunistic weather vane. I'm just wonderful." "I never intended to hurt you personally, Greg." "Didn't you?" he challenged, leaning forward. "Be honest, Rebecca. At least part of this was about making me pay for underestimating you, for taking you for granted." I considered his words, determined to be truthful even if it was uncomfortable. "Yes," I admitted. "Part of it was. Hearing you dismiss me to Andrew that night. It crystallized years of feeling invisible, of having my contributions minimized or ignored. But the acquisition itself isn't personal. Summit is a good company with valuable assets currently being underutilized. Pinnacle can help it reach its potential." "Such business jargon," Greg observed. "I almost don't recognize you when you talk like that." "That's the problem, isn't it? You never recognized this part of me existed." He sipped his scotch, eyes never leaving mine. "I've been thinking about that, about all the times you made suggestions that I implemented without proper credit, about how you seemed to understand my clients better than I did sometimes." He set his glass down precisely. "I've been a fool, haven't I?" The admission, so unexpected from a man as proud as Greg, momentarily rendered me speechless. "I didn't see what was right in front of me," he continued into my silence. "I was so busy playing the role of the successful entrepreneur that I never noticed I had a brilliant strategic partner already on my team." He smiled ruefully. "The worst part is, if I'd actually listened to you over the years, Summit probably wouldn't be in the position that made it vulnerable to acquisition in the first place." His admission hung in the air between us, reshaping the atmosphere of our conversation. I took a sip of wine, giving myself a moment to process this unexpected turn. The validation I'd sought for years had finally arrived, but in circumstances neither of us could have imagined. "Recognition isn't much use if it only comes when there's nothing left to lose," I finally said, my voice softer than I'd intended. Greg nodded slowly, turning his glass between his fingers. "I deserved that, but I'm not just saying this because of the acquisition. The board meeting today was illuminating. When I presented my restructuring plan, they asked questions I couldn't answer. Questions about market positioning and client retention that you would have anticipated." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "Andrew actually said, Rebecca would have thought of that." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. "What did you say?" "Nothing," Greg admitted. "Because he was right. You would have thought of it. You did think of it years ago, when you suggested we diversify our service offerings instead of relying so heavily on the product line that's now becoming obsolete." I remembered that conversation clearly, an evening on our deck, overlooking the mountains, Greg dismissing my concerns as overly cautious. That was 4 years ago. 4 years we could have spent implementing a solution instead of heading toward a crisis, he acknowledged. My pride cost Summit dearly. The waiter approached to take our dinner orders, creating a momentary pause in our intensely personal conversation. Greg ordered automatically, the seared salmon he always chose, while I selected something I'd never tried before, a decision that felt symbolic in ways I couldn't quite articulate. "What happens now?" Greg asked after the waiter departed. With Summit? With us? The question contained too many complexities to address at once. I focused on the part I could speak to with certainty. Summit will receive the capital infusion it needs immediately. We'll implement a strategic repositioning that builds on the company's strengths while addressing the vulnerabilities in the current business model. The team Pinnacle has assembled has experience with exactly this type of transformation. And the leadership structure? The board has recommended you stay on as a consultant during the transition, I reminded him. That arrangement could work well if you're willing to approach it constructively. Greg studied me across the table, a new wariness in his expression. And if I'm not? If I walk away entirely? I considered the question seriously. Then Summit would lose valuable institutional knowledge and client relationships, making the transition more difficult than necessary. It wouldn't be in anyone's best interest. Not Summit's, not Pinnacle's, and certainly not yours. What about your interest? Greg challenged. Professionally speaking, wouldn't it be cleaner to make a complete break? Perhaps, I acknowledged. But I've never made business decisions based on what's emotionally convenient. He laughed shortly, genuine amusement breaking through the tension. No, I suppose you haven't. That much is abundantly clear. His expression sobered. And personally speaking? What happens to us, Rebecca? I set my wine glass down carefully, acutely aware of the wedding band still on my left hand. I don't know, I admitted. I've been so focused on establishing Pinnacle and positioning it for this acquisition that I haven't fully considered the personal implications. That sounds like the old me, Greg observed quietly. All business, personal consequences an afterthought. The observation stung. With its accuracy, had I become what I'd resented in him? Maybe it does, I conceded. But the difference is that I'm willing to have this conversation now, not months from now when the damage can't be undone. Our main courses arrived, creating another welcome pause in the increasingly fraught discussion. We ate in relative silence for several minutes, the excellent food barely registering as my mind worked through possibilities and implications. I've been offered a position in Chicago, Greg finally said, setting down his fork. Venture capital firm. They've been watching Summit for a while, apparently. Ironic that my failure there has created other opportunities. My stomach tightened, unexpectedly. When would you start? They want me in 4 weeks, after the initial transition phase with Summit. He studied my reaction carefully. It would mean moving, obviously. The prospect of Greg leaving Denver, leaving our home, our established routines, our life together, hit me harder than anticipated. Despite the confrontation we'd engaged in professionally, I hadn't seriously considered that our marriage might not survive. What about the children? I asked, focusing on practical matters when emotional ones felt too complicated. I wouldn't expect them to relocate during the school year, he replied reasonably. We could work out arrangements. They're old enough to have input into any decisions about custody. Custody. The word made everything suddenly, painfully real. You've thought this through, I observed, trying to keep my tone neutral. Since Friday, he confirmed, when it became clear that things between us had fundamentally changed. When I realized I didn't actually know the woman I've been married to for 12 years. He paused, his expression softening slightly. Or perhaps, I did once, but lost sight of her somehow along the way. I don't want a divorce, Greg, I said, surprising myself with the directness of the statement. I wanted recognition, respect, the space to be more than just your supportive wife. I didn't set out to destroy our marriage. He studied me thoughtfully. Can you honestly say you still want to be married to me? After what you've learned about how I've seen you all these years? The question deserved careful consideration. I thought about our history together, the early years when we'd truly been partners, the gradual shift as Greg's success had changed the dynamic between us, The moment at the Christmas party when the accumulated weight of 1,000 small dismissals had finally become unbearable. "I want to be married to the man who saw me as an equal," I said finally. "The man who valued my mind as much as my support. Whether that man still exists, or can exist again, I don't know." Greg nodded slowly, accepting the conditional nature of my answer. "And I don't know if I can be married to a woman who orchestrated a takeover of my company, no matter how justified her reasons might have been." He smiled faintly. "We seem to be at an impasse." "Not necessarily," I countered. "An impasse implies no way forward. I think we simply don't yet know what the way forward looks like." "Always the strategist," he observed with a hint of his old warmth. "So what do you propose?" I considered the question as I finished my wine. "I think we need time. You as a consultant to Summit during the transition period. Me as Pinnacle's representative managing the acquisition. Both of us figuring out who we are in these new roles before we make irreversible decisions about our marriage." Greg studied me with that new intensity I was still adjusting to, the gaze of a man truly seeing me for perhaps the first time. "Reasonable," he acknowledged. "Though I'm not sure my pride can take watching you run the company I built." "You mean the company we built?" I corrected gently. He conceded the point with a slight nod. "Fair enough." As we left the restaurant, the awkwardness of our new reality became apparent. We'd arrived separately, would drive home separately, and would return to a house that no longer felt comfortably like the shared space it had been for a decade. "I'll stay at the Brown Palace tonight," Greg said as we stood in the parking lot. "I need some distance to process everything." I nodded, understanding the impulse while feeling a conflicting emptiness at the prospect of returning to our home alone. "The children will want to know where you are." "Tell them." He paused, clearly struggling with what message to convey. "Tell them I'm working through some business changes, that we both are, and that we'll talk with them together when things are clearer." "All right," I agreed, though the conversation ahead with our perceptive teenagers felt daunting. "Will you come to Emma's debate competition tomorrow?" Something like gratitude flickered across his face at this small extension of normalcy. Of course, I wouldn't miss it. We parted with an awkward, almost embrace, neither quite ready for the familiar intimacy of a kiss, yet unwilling to treat each other as mere acquaintances. I watched him walk to his car, the set of his shoulders displaying the determined posture I'd observed countless times when he faced business challenges. For all his flaws, Greg's resilience had always been admirable. The house felt cavernous. When I returned, the children already in bed after their busy Monday activities. I moved through the familiar rooms with a strange sense of dislocation, as though seeing our carefully curated life together from an outsider's perspective. The family photos on the walls, the accumulated mementos of shared vacations and milestones, the spaces designed for a unified family now seemed like artifacts from another era. I poured myself another glass of wine and settled in the home office that had been designated as mine, but had always functioned as an extension of our shared space rather than a true domain of my own. My laptop contained 2 separate email accounts now, the personal one Greg was familiar with, and the Pinnacle business account that represented my independent professional identity. Opening the latter, I found a series of congratulatory messages from my team about the board's decision, along with detailed questions about next steps in the acquisition process. The practical matters grounded me, providing focus when my personal life felt increasingly unmoored. I worked until after midnight, drafting communications and transition plans, finally falling into exhausted sleep in our bed that felt too large without Greg's familiar presence. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the blinds, as my alarm jolted me awake. The children were in the kitchen when I came downstairs, Emma reviewing debate notes while Tyler rummaged in the refrigerator. They looked up with identical expressions of curiosity when I appeared. "Where's Dad?" Emma asked directly, her 16-year-old perspective missing nothing. His car wasn't here when we got home last night, and his side of the closet is half empty. I poured coffee, buying myself moments to formulate the right approach. Your father is staying at a hotel for a few days while we work through some business matters, I said carefully. Tyler closed the refrigerator, his 14-year-old Sue frame already approaching Greg's height. What business matters? Is it about Summit? Of course they would have picked up on tensions despite our efforts to shield them. These were children raised in a household where business discussions had been dinner table conversation. Yes, I acknowledged, seeing no benefit in evasion. Summit is going through some changes, and both your dad and I are involved in ways that are complicated. Emma's sharp gaze assessed me with disconcerting maturity. Are you getting divorced? The directness of the question shouldn't have surprised me, coming from a debate team champion who valued clarity above comfort. We're not making any decisions about our marriage right now, I answered honestly. We're focusing on resolving the business situation first. What business situation? Tyler pressed, his expression so similar to Greg's when pursuing a point that I felt a momentary pang. I took a deep breath. They deserved more than platitudes, but the full complexity of the situation was perhaps too much. A company I'm involved with is acquiring Summit Technologies. It's creating some temporary tension between your father and me, but we're working through it professionally. Emma's eyebrows shot up. Wait, you're buying Dad's company? Since when do you have a company? It's recent, I acknowledged. But not as recent as your father believes. I've been developing this project for months. Is that why you've been taking all those meetings you said were for the school fundraising committee? Tyler asked, surprising me with his observation. I nodded, feeling a twinge of guilt for the deception, however necessary it had seemed. Sometimes it's easier to build something new when you don't have to defend the idea at every stage. Emma studied me with newfound interest, as though seeing beyond mom to the professional woman beneath. Dad must be freaking out. Your father is adjusting to the situation, I said diplomatically. It's challenging for everyone, but whatever happens with Summit, nothing will change how much we both love you and want what's best for you. Standard parental reassurance, Emma noted with the cynicism particular to intelligent teenagers. But I appreciate the effort. Despite her tone, I could see uncertainty beneath her composed exterior. These were children who had grown up with stability, with parents who, whatever our private disagreements, had presented a united front. That foundation was now visibly cracking. Your dad will be at your debate competition this afternoon, I told her, offering the small reassurance I could. Some things don't change, even when others do. The school day routine proceeded with surface normality. Lunches packed, backpacks checked, rides arranged. As the house emptied, the silence felt oppressive rather than peaceful. I moved to my home office, preparing for the day's meetings while processing the unsettling conversation with the children. My phone rang as I was reviewing transition documents. Olivia's name appeared on the screen. Greg has countered, she said without preamble when I answered. He's proposing an alternative structure for the acquisition, one that would position him as co-leader of the transition team alongside you. I leaned back in my chair, processing this unexpected development. That's not what the board approved yesterday. No, Olivia confirmed, but 3 board members have indicated they find his proposal intriguing. It would potentially smooth the client transition, maintaining continuity while still accomplishing the strategic reorganization. And giving Greg a face-saving way to remain involved, I added, understanding the psychology at work. Has he submitted formal documentation for this proposal? Yes, surprisingly comprehensive given the time frame. I'm sending it to you now. My email pinged with the incoming document. I'll review it immediately. When does the board want a response? They've scheduled a follow-up meeting for Thursday morning. Greg has apparently canceled his previous commitments to focus on this. After ending the call, I opened Greg's proposal with wary curiosity. The document was detailed and thoughtful, acknowledging Summit's vulnerabilities while proposing a joint leadership approach that would leverage both his institutional knowledge and Pinnacle's fresh perspective. It was, I had to admit, potentially workable from a business standpoint. But the personal implications were far more complex. Could we genuinely collaborate professionally while our marriage hung in limbo? Could I trust Greg to treat me as an equal partner when he'd failed to do so for years? My contemplation was interrupted by another call, this time from Eleanor. "I hear Wilson has countered with a co-leadership proposal," she said when I answered. "Clever move. Forces you to either work directly with him or reject a reasonable offer and look petty." "I'm still reviewing the details," I replied, "but that's my initial assessment as well." "What are you thinking?" Eleanor had become adept at reading my tone over our months of collaboration. I sighed, looking out the window at the mountains, visible in the distance, the unchanging backdrop to the city where both my marriage and my business life were undergoing seismic shifts. "I'm thinking that emotions make poor business advisors, but ignoring them entirely is equally dangerous." Spoken like someone trying very hard to be objective about a deeply personal situation, Eleanor observed dryly. Cut through the consultant speak. "Rebecca, do you want to work with your husband or not?" The bluntness of the question was exactly what I needed. "I don't know," I admitted. "The man I saw yesterday at dinner, the one who finally acknowledged my contributions and capabilities, yes, I could work with him, but I'm not convinced that wasn't just a temporary response to shock and defeat." "There's only one way to find out," Eleanor pointed out pragmatically. "A trial period with clear parameters and performance metrics would reveal whether this new awareness of yours is sustainable or merely situational." "You're suggesting I approach my marriage like a probationary employment period?" I asked, half amused despite the seriousness of the situation. "I'm suggesting you apply the same analytical skills to your personal relationship that you've applied so effectively to your professional ones," she corrected. "Identify what you need, establish how to measure whether you're getting it, and set a timeline for reassessment." The advice was characteristically direct and practical. "I'll think about it," I promised. "Right now I need to focus on Emma's debate competition. At least Greg and I can present a united front there, whatever happens with Summit." The high school auditorium was already filling when I arrived that afternoon. I spotted Greg in the second row, saving seats with his jacket. He wore a tie, unusual, for him outside of business meetings, and looked as though he'd made a particular effort with his appearance. For Emma, I assumed, rather than for me. "Thanks for coming," he said as I took the seat beside him. "Emma was worried we might not both show up given everything. I wouldn't miss it," I replied, settling my purse beneath the seat. "She's been preparing for this competition for months." A slightly awkward silence fell between us, the familiar ease of 12 years of marriage temporarily suspended by the events of recent days. Around us, other parents chatted comfortably, unaware of the tension radiating from our careful politeness. "I submitted an alternative proposal for the transition structure," Greg said finally, keeping his voice low as the debate teams began to assemble on stage. "I know. Olivia sent it to me this morning." I glanced at him sideways. "Co-leadership is an interesting approach given the circumstances." "It makes business sense," he replied with careful neutrality. "Summit's clients know and trust me. Pinnacle's strategic vision is solid. Together, we could minimize disruption while maximizing value." "And personally?" I pressed, needing to understand his motivation beyond the business rationale. "Can you actually work alongside me after everything that's happened?" Greg's attention remained apparently fixed on the stage, though I could tell he was choosing his words with unusual care. "I think I need to," he said finally. "For Summit, yes. But also for myself. For us, maybe, if there's still an us to consider." Before I could respond, the debate moderator stepped to the microphone, beginning the formal introductions. Emma stood with her team, poised and confident in a blazer that mirrored Greg's business attire. Watching her, I was struck by how much of both of us she carried. My analytical mind, Greg's confident presence. "She's going to be formidable," Greg murmured beside me, unmistakable pride in his voice. "Harvard debate team should start recruiting now." I smiled despite myself, the shared parental pride momentarily bridging the gap between us. "Yale would be a better fit for her style," I countered, continuing our long-running joke about our alma maters. The debate began, Emma's team arguing the affirmative position on corporate responsibility legislation. Her opening statement was precisely structured, her research impeccable as she established their position with calm authority. "That's your influence," Greg whispered as she concluded to appreciative applause. "The way she builds her case, point by point." "But your delivery style," I acknowledged. "The confidence, the strategic pauses." We fell silent again as the opposition began their rebuttal, but something had shifted subtly between us. A reminder of what we'd built together beyond Summit Technologies, beyond careers and acquisitions. Our children were the product of our partnership at its best, embodying the strengths of both parents even as those parents struggled to remember what had brought them together in the first place. Emma's team won decisively, her closing argument drawing compliments even from the opposing coach. We waited in the lobby afterward, standing slightly apart but presenting the united front we'd promised. "You came!" Emma exclaimed, hurrying toward us with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "Both of you." "Of course we did," Greg replied, hugging her with obvious affection. "You were brilliant." "The opposition didn't anticipate your refutation of their economic impact argument," I added, genuinely impressed with her tactical approach. "You completely reframed the discussion." Emma beamed at the specific praise. "That was actually inspired by something you said last month, Mom, about how short-term profits often disguise long-term costs. I just applied it to environmental regulation." The acknowledgement, so automatic, so different from what I'd grown accustomed to from Greg, caught me off guard. "I'm glad it helped," I managed, unexpectedly touched by the realization that my daughter had been listening, learning, and applying my perspectives in ways I hadn't fully appreciated. Greg's expression as he watched our exchange held something I couldn't quite identify. Regret, perhaps, or recognition. "Your mother has always understood the interplay between immediate gains and future consequences," he said quietly. "Something I should have paid more attention to myself." The comment hung between us, laden with meanings that extended far beyond debate strategy. Emma glanced between us, her perceptive gaze missing nothing. "Are you two actually talking now? Like, really talking, not just pretending everything's normal?" "We're trying," I acknowledged, meeting Greg's eyes briefly. "It's complicated, but we're working on it." "Good," she declared with teenage definitiveness. "Because this whole situation is super weird, and Tyler and I would appreciate some actual clarity instead of polite avoidance." Greg laughed, the sound genuine if slightly strained. "When did our daughter become the adult in the family?" "Probably around the time you both started hiding major life decisions from each other," Emma suggested pointedly. "Just saying." Her directness was both discomfiting and refreshing. "Point taken," I conceded. "How about ice cream to celebrate your win? We can pick up Tyler and have a family discussion about what's happening." "An actual honest conversation? Revolutionary concept?" Emma observed dryly, but her expression softened. "Okay, but I want rocky road. Emotional conversations require chocolate." As we walked toward the parking lot, Greg fell into step beside me. "Co-parenting and co-leadership," he murmured. "Apparently, we're trial running both simultaneously." "Apparently so," I agreed. watching Emma stride ahead of us, already texting Tyler about the ice cream plan. For what it's worth, I'm reviewing your proposal seriously. It has merit from a business perspective. And from a personal one? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. I considered the question as we reached our separate cars. That remains to be seen, I answered honestly. But I'm willing to find out if you are. Greg nodded, accepting the conditional nature of my response. I am, he said simply, more than I would have expected 2 days ago. As I watched him walk to his car, I realized that whatever came next, for Summit, for Pinnacle, for our marriage, nothing would ever return to the comfortable assumptions of before. The simple housewife was gone forever, replaced by a woman Greg was only beginning to truly see. Whether that seeing had come too late for our relationship remained to be determined, but one thing was certain. I would never again allow myself to be underestimated or dismissed by my husband or anyone else. The ice cream shop buzzed with the eager energy of after-school crowds, teenagers clustered around tables, younger children with parents trying to contain sugar-fueled enthusiasm. Our family claimed a quiet booth in the corner, an island of serious conversation amidst the cheerful chaos. Tyler had arrived with characteristic teenage hunger, already halfway through his double scoop of mint chocolate chip before the rest of us had properly settled. So, Emma began, methodically arranging her rocky road in perfect bites. Someone want to explain why Dad's living in a hotel and Mom's apparently buying his company? Greg and I exchanged glances, the responsibility of explanation hanging between us. I nodded slightly, yielding the first response to him. Summit Technologies is being acquired by Pinnacle Solutions, Greg said, his business voice softened for our children's benefit. Pinnacle is a company your mother has established. The situation is unexpected for me. Unexpected, Tyler repeated skeptically. You mean you didn't know Mom had a whole secret company? I didn't, Greg confirmed, his expression carefully neutral, which has created some tension between us professionally and personally. Emma's sharp gaze moved between us. Did you start this company specifically to buy Dad's, or was that just a convenient target? The perceptiveness of the question reminded me again how little we could hide from our observant children. Summit became an acquisition target when I recognized its potential combined with its current vulnerabilities, I explained. The decision was business-driven, though the personal considerations are obviously complex. That's not really an answer, Emma noted. No, I acknowledged, because the truth is complicated. I started Pinnacle because I needed something that was mine, a professional identity separate from being Greg Wilson's wife and your mother. The specific focus on Summit developed as I recognized that the company was struggling in ways that matched Pinnacle's strengths. And you didn't tell Dad because, Tyler prompted, abandoning his ice cream to engage more fully in the conversation. I measured my words carefully, aware of Greg listening beside me. Because I wasn't confident he would take me seriously as a businesswoman. Because I needed to establish Pinnacle's credibility independently before approaching Summit's. Fort? Because I've spent years underestimating your mother's business acumen, Greg added quietly. And she correctly anticipated that I would dismiss her concerns about Summit's direction. The blunt acknowledgement clearly surprised both children. Emma's eyebrows rose while Tyler studied his father with newfound curiosity. So are you getting divorced? Tyler asked, returning to the question that clearly weighed on both children's minds. We don't know yet, I answered honestly. Right now, we're focusing on what happens with Summit and Pinnacle. Your father has proposed a co-leadership structure for the transition period. Which means you'd be working together, Emma clarified. Like, in the same office? Every day? Greg nodded. That's the idea. Assuming your mother agrees to the arrangement. The board will make that decision on Thursday, I added, based on what makes the most business sense for Summit's future. Emma stirred her melting ice cream thoughtfully. And what happens to us? To our family? The question cut through the business talk to the heart of what our children cared about most. Greg reached over to cover Emma's hand with his own. Whatever happens between your mother and me professionally or personally, nothing changes our commitment to you both. You are our priority, always. But practically speaking, Tyler pressed, who lives where? Do we move? Split time between houses? For now, nothing changes with our living arrangements, I assured him. Your father is temporarily staying elsewhere while we navigate the immediate business situation, but no permanent decisions have been made about our family home. Your mother is right, Greg confirmed, and we promise that you'll both be included in any conversations about arrangements that affect you directly. Emma abandoned pretense, setting aside her barely touched ice cream. This is weird. You know that, right? Most parents get divorced because they hate each other or someone cheats. You're separating over corporate governance? The description was so accurately absurd that I couldn't help a small smile. It does sound unusual when you put it that way. But relationships break down for many reasons, not just dramatic ones. Sometimes it's years of small misunderstandings and unmet expectations that create the real fractures. Your mother deserved more recognition than I gave her, Greg added, surprising me with his candor. Both personally and professionally. The current situation is forcing me to acknowledge that failure. So fix it, Tyler suggested with teenage simplicity. If you know what you did wrong, just do better. Greg's expression softened. I'm trying. Too, buddy. That's part of what this co-leadership proposal is about. But trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Emma studied us both with unsettling maturity. You still love each other, though. That's obvious even with all this weird business drama. Her assertion caught me off guard. Did I still love Greg? The question had been circling beneath my conscious thoughts, overshadowed by the immediate practical considerations of Pinnacle's acquisition and Summit's transition. The complex mix of emotions I felt toward him certainly included love, but also hurt, resentment, and a wariness born of years of dismissal. Love isn't always enough on its own, I said carefully. It needs to be paired with respect, recognition, and genuine partnership. Which I failed to provide consistently, Greg acknowledged. Something I'm only now really understanding. A heavy silence fell over our booth, the lighthearted atmosphere of the ice cream shop in stark contrast to the weighty conversation. Tyler broke the tension, pushing his empty dish aside with exaggerated casualness. So basically, you two need to figure out if you can actually work together without killing each other, and then decide if you still want to be married. And meanwhile, we just keep doing normal life and pretend everything isn't super weird? That's a fairly accurate summary, I admitted, somewhat impressed by his pragmatic assessment. Okay then, he shrugged. Can I get another scoop while you work on that? The simple request, so normal amidst our family's upheaval, released some of the tension. Greg smiled, reaching for his wallet. Sure, bud. Emma, want anything else? As the children returned to the counter, Greg turned to me. They're handling this better than I expected. They're resilient, I agreed. But they're also watching carefully. How we navigate this will shape their understanding of relationships, of conflict resolution, of professional ethics. No pressure, Greg observed dryly. Just modeling healthy, adult behavior while completely reinventing our professional and personal relationship. Exactly. I found myself appreciating his attempt at humor, this glimpse of the man I'd originally married visible beneath the corporate persona he'd increasingly adopted over the years. Have you really thought through what co-leadership would mean, Greg? Daily collaboration, shared decision-making, Public professional equality after years of our very different roles? His expression grew more serious. I've thought about little else since submitting the proposal. It won't be easy for either of us, but I believe it's the best option for Summit's successful transition and, he hesitated, potentially for understanding whether there's still a foundation we can rebuild personally. Before I could respond, the children returned, Tyler triumphantly bearing another massive scoop of ice cream while Emma carried a water bottle, having apparently decided against further indulgence. "So, when's the board meeting?" Emma asked, directly resuming our conversation. "The one that decides if you work together?" "Thursday morning," I replied. "We should have an answer by afternoon." "And then what?" Tyler asked through a mouthful of ice cream. "Like, what happens after they decide?" Greg and I exchanged glances, both recognizing that we hadn't planned beyond the immediate decision point. "If the board accepts the co-leadership proposal, we'll begin working together immediately on the transition plan," Greg explained. "If not, we'll need to determine alternative arrangements." "Either way," I added, "we'll have a clearer picture of next steps by Thursday evening, and we promise to keep you both informed." As we finished our family discussion and headed to our separate cars, Greg returning to his hotel, the children and I to our home, I found myself contemplating Emma's assertion that our love for each other remained visible despite the current complications. Was she right? And if so, was that love strong enough to survive the fundamental shift in our relationship dynamic that Pinnacle's acquisition of Summit represented? Wednesday brought a flurry of preparation for Thursday's board meeting. I worked from Pinnacle's temporary offices, finalizing our response to Greg's co-leadership proposal and preparing supporting documentation. My team carefully vetted the arrangement from multiple angles: legal, operational, financial, identifying potential pitfalls and proposing safeguards. It could work, Daniel concluded during our afternoon strategy session, but only with clearly defined responsibilities and decision-making protocols. The reporting structure needs to be unambiguous, despite the co-leadership title. Olivia nodded agreement. I've drafted the necessary amendments to the acquisition agreement. The key is ensuring that deadlocked decisions have a clear resolution mechanism that doesn't undermine either leader's authority. What about the personal dimension? Eleanor asked directly, her gaze fixed on me. Can you realistically separate your marital issues from your professional collaboration? The question deserved honest assessment. I believe I can, I said after careful consideration. I've spent years compartmentalizing aspects of my life. Being a supportive wife while developing Pinnacle in secret certainly required that skill. The bigger question is whether Greg can truly treat me as an equal partner professionally, regardless of what happens with our marriage. Eleanor's expression remained skeptical. And your evaluation of that likelihood? Uncertain, I admitted. The Greg I've seen since Friday is markedly different from the husband I've known for years, more reflective, more willing to acknowledge his blind spots. Whether that represents genuine evolution or merely a tactical adjustment to unexpected circumstances remains to be seen. You're the only one who can make that judgment call, Eleanor concluded. But whatever you decide, ensure the agreement protects Pinnacle's interests if the collaboration proves unworkable. By evening, our response to Greg's proposal was complete. A qualified acceptance with specific amendments addressing governance, dispute resolution, and performance metrics. I sent the document to Olivia for final legal review, then drove home through Denver's rush hour traffic, my mind still processing potential scenarios for Thursday's meeting. The house was quiet when I arrived, a note from the children on the kitchen counter explaining they were at their respective extracurricular activities until late. I changed from my business attire into more comfortable clothes, then settled at the kitchen island with a glass of wine and the final drafts for tomorrow's presentation. My phone rang, Greg's number appearing on the screen. I hesitated briefly before answering. Yes? "I received your response to my proposal," he said without preamble. "The amendments are thorough." "They address necessary governance concerns," I replied, maintaining a professional tone despite the personal nature of our connection. The original proposal left too many potential decision points unresolved. "I'm not disagreeing," Greg clarified. "Actually, I'm impressed. You've anticipated contingencies I hadn't considered." The compliment, delivered without qualification, still felt unfamiliar coming from him. "Thank you. That's what good business planning requires." A brief silence stretched between us. "I realized something today," Greg finally continued, his tone shifting to something more personal. "When I was preparing for tomorrow's meeting, I caught myself wondering what you would think of my presentation. Not adversarially, but as someone whose strategic insight I value." "And?" I prompted, unsure where this reflection was leading. "And I recognize that I've always done that," he admitted. "Throughout our marriage, through Summit's entire development, I've mentally run important decisions past your perspective, incorporated your viewpoint into my thinking, often without consciously acknowledging it, even to myself." The recognition he was describing aligned precisely with what I'd felt lacking in our relationship. Not that he never valued my thinking, but that he failed to acknowledge that value, instead presenting the resulting decisions as entirely his own. "That's an important insight," I said carefully. "It's more than that," Greg continued, urgency entering his voice. "It's the foundation of why this co-leadership proposal isn't just a strategic business move for Summit's benefit. It's the structure we should have had all along. We've always been partners in my thinking. I just failed to formalize that partnership or give you proper credit." The words he was offering now, the recognition I'd sought for years, felt simultaneously gratifying and slightly too convenient given the current circumstances. "Greg, I appreciate what you're saying, but you're wondering if I'm just telling you what you want to hear because Pinnacle holds the stronger position," he finished for me. "That's fair skepticism, but I'm asking you to consider that people can have genuine realizations when their assumptions are forcefully challenged, when they're confronted with evidence that contradicts their self-serving narratives." I considered his words, struck by the self-awareness they demonstrated. "I want to believe that's true." "Then give the co-leadership arrangement a genuine chance," he urged. "Not just as a business transition strategy, but as a way for us to redefine our professional relationship and maybe eventually our personal one." "The board will make that decision tomorrow," I reminded him, deliberately maintaining some distance from his emotional appeal. "The board will follow our lead on this," Greg countered. "If we present a united front on the co-leadership structure, they'll approve it. You know that as well as I do." He wasn't wrong. The board's primary concern was ensuring a smooth transition that preserved Summit's value and potential. If Greg and I jointly endorsed the co-leadership approach, their approval was all but guaranteed. "I need to think," I said finally, "about what this means beyond tomorrow's meeting, about whether we can genuinely rebuild trust after everything that's happened." "I understand," Greg replied, his tone softening. "For what it's worth, Rebecca, I'm sorry, not just for underestimating you professionally, but for gradually diminishing you personally over the years, for taking your support for granted while failing to provide the same in return." The apology, direct and unqualified, caught me off guard. "Thank you for saying that." "I mean it," he emphasized. "Whether the board approves our co-leadership tomorrow or not, whether our marriage survives this upheaval or doesn't, that truth needed to be spoken." After we ended the call, I sat with my wine in the quiet kitchen, contemplating the distance between the man I'd married and the one who had just offered such a clear-eyed apology. People could change. I knew that from my own transformation from supportive wife to company founder. The question was whether Greg's apparent evolution represented lasting growth or merely a situational adaptation to his altered circumstances. Thursday morning arrived with Denver's characteristic crystal clarity, the mountains sharp against the blue sky as I drove downtown for the 9 a.m. board meeting. I'd slept poorly, my mind cycling through scenarios and contingencies, weighing professional strategies against personal considerations. The Summit Technologies boardroom occupied the top floor of their downtown headquarters, its floor-to-ceiling, windows offering panoramic views of the city and mountains beyond. As I entered, several board members were already seated around the polished mahogany table, their expressions revealing varying degrees of curiosity about my presence. Greg stood near the coffee service, engaged in quiet conversation with Andrew. He looked up as I entered, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. Board Chair Patricia Lawson, a formidable woman in her 60s who had built and sold 3 successful companies before joining Summit's governance team, called the meeting to order precisely at 9. We're here to consider the proposed co-leadership structure for Summit's transition following acquisition by Pinnacle Solutions, she began, her tone brisk but not unfriendly. Both parties have submitted documentation outlining their positions, with apparent agreement in principle subject to specific governance protocols. She turned to Greg first. Mr. Wilson, as Summit's founding CEO, please present your perspective on this arrangement. Greg moved to the head of the table with the confident ease of someone who had commanded this room for years. Yet I noticed subtle differences in his demeanor, a thoughtfulness that tempered his usual assertive style, a deliberate inclusiveness in his gesture toward me as he began. Summit Technologies stands at a critical juncture, he began. Our core product line faces increasing market pressure, while our newer initiatives require additional capital and strategic repositioning to reach their potential. Pinnacle Solutions offers both the financial resources and fresh perspective necessary for Summit's evolution. He paused, his gaze moving deliberately around the table. Initially, I resisted this acquisition. My identity has been deeply entwined with Summit since its founding, but upon careful reflection, I recognized that resistance was rooted more in personal pride than in business logic. The candid acknowledgement clearly surprised several board members, Andrew's eyebrows rising visibly at Greg's uncharacteristic humility. The co-leadership structure I've proposed, Greg continued, leverages both my institutional knowledge and client relationships alongside Pinnacle's strategic vision and financial resources. Ms. Morgan, I interjected. Quietly, Greg nodded, accepting the correction smoothly. Ms. Morgan brings complementary expertise and perspective that, combined with Summit's established market position, creates significant potential for growth beyond what either company could achieve independently. Patricia turned to me. Ms. Morgan, your response? I moved to stand beside Greg, rather than replacing him at the head of the table. A deliberate positioning that visually reinforced the co-leadership concept we were discussing. Pinnacle Solutions identified Summit Technologies as an acquisition, target precisely because of its strong foundation and unrealized potential, I began. The current market challenges facing Summit's primary product line are solvable with proper strategic repositioning and capital infusion. The client relationships Mr. Wilson has established represent significant value that would be needlessly diminished by a complete leadership change during transition. I distributed copies of our amended proposal to the board members. The co-leadership structure, with the governance protocols outlined in our response document, provides optimal balance between continuity and innovation. It allows Summit's team to maintain consistency while implementing necessary strategic shifts. Patricia studied the document carefully, her experienced gaze missing nothing. These governance protocols are unusually detailed. The dispute resolution mechanism in particular suggests anticipation of significant disagreement between the co-leaders. Good governance anticipates potential challenges before they arise, I replied evenly. Given the circumstances of this acquisition and the historical relationship between Mr. Wilson and myself, these safeguards serve everyone's interests. A knowing look passed between several board members. Clearly, the personal connection underlying this business transaction was an open secret. Patricia addressed it directly. To be blunt, Ms. Morgan, Mr. Wilson, can you effectively separate your marital situation from your professional responsibilities in this arrangement? The question hung in the air, direct and unavoidable. Greg glanced at me, silently yielding the first response. Our professional capabilities exist independently of our personal relationship, I answered carefully. The proposed governance structure ensures that strategic decisions are evaluated on their business merits, with clear resolution pathways should disagreement arise. Additionally, Greg added, our shared interest in Summit's successful transition provides powerful motivation to maintain professional focus regardless of personal complications. Patricia's expression remained skeptical. In my experience, such clean separation between personal and professional matters is rarely sustainable, particularly in high-stress transition environments. With respect, Ms. Lawson, I countered, Mr. Wilson and I have already demonstrated our ability to prioritize business considerations despite personal circumstances. The very existence of this acquisition process and our joint proposal for its implementation evidences that capability. Andrew leaned forward, addressing the board for the first time. If I may offer an observation, I've worked closely with Greg for 15 years, and briefly with Rebecca during Pinnacle's initial engagement with Summit. Their complementary skills are evident, as is their mutual respect, despite current personal tensions. I believe the co-leadership structure offers Summit the best transition path forward. His endorsement carried particular weight, given his long association with Greg and initial alignment against the acquisition. Several board members nodded thoughtfully. We'll need time to review these amended protocols in detail, Patricia announced after further discussion. The board will recess for 1 hour to consider the proposal and its implications. As the board members filed out, Greg and I found ourselves momentarily alone in the impressive boardroom. The city stretched below us, people and vehicles moving through their ordinary Thursday routines, unaware of the corporate drama unfolding above them. That went reasonably well, Greg observed, loosening his tie slightly. Andrew's support was unexpected. Andrew consistently aligns himself with the most advantageous position, I noted. His endorsement suggests he believes the co-leadership approach will succeed. Greg smiled faintly. Or at least that visibly supporting it now serves his interests. The shared moment of cynical understanding regarding Andrew's motivations created an unexpected connection between us, a reminder of our years of discussing Summit's internal politics over dinner, analyzing the personalities and ambitions shaping the company's culture. Rebecca, Greg said more seriously, whatever the board decides, I want you to know that I meant what I said yesterday, about recognizing how I've failed to acknowledge your contributions, both to Summit and to our partnership. I studied him, carefully, searching for signs of the dismissive husband I'd grown accustomed to. Instead, I found only genuine regret in his expression. Thank you, I said simply. That acknowledgement matters. Does it matter enough? He asked quietly. To create a foundation we can rebuild from? The question contained layers of meaning beyond our immediate business situation. Before I could formulate a response, the boardroom door opened as Andrew returned, effectively ending our private conversation. The hour passed in separate conversations, Greg conferring with Summit's executive team about transition contingencies, me connecting with Olivia and Daniel to discuss the board's likely concerns. When the board reconvened, Patricia's expression revealed little about their conclusions. After careful consideration, she announced once everyone was seated, the board has determined that the co-leadership structure proposed by Mr. Wilson and Ms. Morgan represents the most advantageous approach for Summit's successful transition, subject to the amended governance protocols submitted by Pinnacle Solutions. Relief and apprehension mingled in my chest as Greg caught my eye across the table, his expression mirroring my own complex reaction. We had achieved the professional arrangement we'd proposed. Now came the challenge of making it work, both for Summit's benefit and perhaps for our own. The transition period will be initially established as 3 months, Patricia continued, with formal review at the 6-week mark. Should the co-leadership arrangement prove unworkable, the board reserves the right to implement alternative governance structures as outlined in Section 4.3 of the amended agreement. The remainder of the meeting addressed practical implementation details, office arrangements, reporting structures, communication protocols. Throughout, Greg maintained the unexpectedly collaborative approach he demonstrated during the presentation, consistently acknowledging my expertise and deferring to my judgment on matters related to Pinnacle's strategic vision. As the meeting concluded, Patricia approached us privately. "Impressive performance," she noted dryly. "Now comes the real test, making this arrangement work beyond the boardroom." "We're committed to Summit's successful transition," I assured her. "Personal considerations are secondary to that goal." She studied me with the shrewd assessment of someone who had navigated decades of corporate politics. "In my experience, Ms. Morgan, acknowledging personal dynamics rather than pretending they don't exist leads to more sustainable outcomes. You and Mr. Wilson have significant history to navigate alongside your professional responsibilities." "We're aware of the challenges," Greg acknowledged, "but also of the potential benefits if we succeed." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I hope you do. On both fronts." With a brief nod, she departed, leaving us to contemplate the dual nature of the partnership we had just formalized. "So," Greg said as we gathered our materials, "co-leaders of Summit Technologies. Effective immediately. Your office or mine for the first strategy session." The question, practical, yet loaded with implicit significance, underscored the strange new territory we were entering. Professional equals with a fractured personal relationship, attempting to collaborate on the future of the company one of us had founded and the other had acquired. "Conference room 3, I suggested, choosing neutral territory for this initial conversation. "In 30 minutes. I need to update my team first." He nodded, accepting the professional boundaries I was establishing. "30 minutes. I'll bring the updated transition timeline." As I watched him walk away, I realized we had just committed to spending most of our waking hours together for the next 3 months, rebuilding Summit's structure while simultaneously determining whether our marriage had any foundation left to salvage. The challenge ahead was daunting, but for the first time in years, it contained something unexpected: the possibility that through this professional collaboration, we might rediscover what had been lost between us personally: mutual respect, genuine partnership, and recognition of each other's true capabilities. The 3-month transition period concluded with unexpected success, Summit's integration into Pinnacle proceeding more smoothly than even the most optimistic projections had anticipated. Client retention exceeded targets, team morale stabilized after initial uncertainty, and the technical platform migration advanced with minimal disruption to ongoing operations. As the formal co-leadership arrangement approached its conclusion, the board scheduled a final evaluation meeting to determine Summit's permanent governance structure going forward. "The metrics speak for themselves," Patricia observed as we presented our final transition report in Summit's boardroom, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows that had witnessed so much change over recent months. "Every key performance indicator has exceeded targets. The market has responded positively to the integration, and client feedback indicates strengthened relationships rather than the disruption many feared." Greg nodded, his posture relaxed yet professional as he sat beside me at the head of the table. "Rebecca's strategic vision combined with Summit's established market position has created synergies we couldn't have achieved independently. The collaborative leadership model has proven more effective than I initially anticipated." His candid acknowledgement, delivered without qualification or hint of reservation, still felt remarkable after years of experiencing his reluctance to share credit for business success. The evolution in his professional approach had remained consistent throughout our collaboration, his recognition of my expertise unwavering, even as the initial shock of Pinnacle's acquisition faded into routine partnership. "The question before us now," Patricia continued, "is whether this co-leadership structure should continue beyond the formal transition period, or if Summit would be better served by a more traditional organization with a single chief executive." The board members exchanged glances, several nodding in response to Patricia's framing of the decision. I maintained professional composure, though the question carried implications far beyond corporate governance. Our working relationship had developed genuine momentum, our complementary skills creating an effective partnership that both our teams had come to rely upon. Yet the original agreement had always presumed a time-limited arrangement, a transitional structure rather than permanent configuration. "If I may," Andrew interjected, surprising me with his unsolicited contribution. "Having observed this partnership develop over 3 months, I believe maintaining the co-leadership structure would best serve Summit's continued evolution." Greg's historical knowledge combined with Rebecca's strategic perspective has proven remarkably effective in navigating complex decisions. His endorsement, particularly notable given his initial skepticism about our ability to collaborate effectively, carried significant weight with the board. Several members nodded agreement, though Patricia's expression remained thoughtfully neutral. "Mr. Wilson, Ms. Morgan," she addressed us directly. "Your perspectives on the permanent governance structure are particularly relevant to this decision. Would you prefer to continue the co-leadership arrangement or transition to a more conventional structure?" Greg glanced toward me, silently yielding the first response. "The collaborative model has demonstrated clear benefits during the transition." I began carefully. "Our complementary expertise addresses different aspects of the organization's needs. That said, any permanent arrangement would require clearly defined parameters to ensure continued effectiveness." "I agree with Rebecca's assessment," Greg added. "The past 3 months have revealed advantages to the partnership approach that I hadn't fully anticipated when proposing the initial structure. From my perspective, continuing the collaboration would best serve Summit's long-term interests." Patricia studied us both, her experienced gaze missing nothing. "And the personal dimension? The board has respected your privacy regarding your marital situation, but we must consider whether any personal complications might eventually impact Summit's leadership stability." The direct question hung in the air, addressing the elephant in the room that we'd carefully navigated throughout the transition period. Greg and I had maintained professional focus, despite our complicated personal circumstances, our weekend family arrangements continuing without resolution of our fundamental relationship questions. "Our professional partnership functions effectively, regardless of personal circumstances," I stated firmly, echoing what I'd told Patricia during our midpoint evaluation. "The governance protocols we established provide appropriate mechanisms for addressing any leadership challenges that might emerge. Additionally," Greg added, his tone measured, "working together these past months has actually improved our communication and mutual understanding rather than exacerbating tensions. Whatever decisions we ultimately make about our personal relationship, I'm confident in our ability to maintain effective professional collaboration." The board deliberated for nearly an hour, considering various governance configurations and leadership scenarios. When they reconvened, Patricia Zutt's expression reflected clear decision. "After careful consideration, the board has determined that Summit Technologies will maintain the co-leadership structure established during the transition period, with Mr. Wilson and Ms. Morgan sharing executive authority according to the protocols outlined in the amended governance documents." Relief and apprehension mingled in my chest as Greg caught my eye across the table. The professional arrangement that had proven unexpectedly fulfilling would continue, but so would the daily proximity that forced us to confront the unresolved questions about our personal relationship. "The board has one additional request," Patricia continued, her tone shifting slightly. While we respect the separation between professional and personal matters, we would appreciate clarity regarding your long-term intentions. Not immediately, but within a reasonable time frame. Stability in leadership requires transparency about factors that might affect continued collaboration. Understood, Greg acknowledged. We appreciate the board's patience while we navigate these complicated circumstances. As the meeting concluded and board members departed, Greg and I found ourselves alone in the conference room that had become the center of our professional partnership over recent months. Permanent co-leaders, Greg observed, a small smile playing at his lips. Not what either of us anticipated when this began. No, I agreed, gathering my notes from the presentation. Though it makes sense given the results we've achieved together. Greg studied me thoughtfully, the direct gaze that had once made me uncomfortable now feeling almost familiar after months of close collaboration. And the personal situation? Patricia wasn't wrong about the board needing clarity eventually. I sighed, setting down my materials to give the question proper attention. I know, and we need clarity ourselves, beyond the weekend arrangement we've maintained during the transition. The limbo we'd occupied, professional partners during the week, carefully cordial housemates on weekends, neither fully separated nor genuinely reconciled, had become our new normal. Neither of us quite ready to force permanent resolution while focused on Summit's successful transition. Have dinner with me tonight, Greg suggested suddenly. Not to discuss business or transition metrics or client strategies, just us, talking about what comes next for us personally. The invitation hung between us, so similar to countless business dinners we'd shared over recent months, yet fundamentally different in its purpose. All right, I agreed after a moment's consideration. We do need to address the question directly, without the children present or business matters as convenient distractions. We selected a restaurant neither of us had visited before, neutral territory with no associations to either our married history or recent professional collaboration. The small French bistro in Cherry Creek offered quiet ambiance and sufficient privacy for the conversation ahead. Thank you for agreeing to this, Greg said once we were seated, the soft lighting creating an intimate atmosphere despite the professional distance we'd maintained for months. I know it would be easier to continue in our current pattern, postponing decisions about our personal relationship while focusing on Summit's governance. Easier, but increasingly artificial, I acknowledged, unfolding my napkin to avoid his gaze momentarily. We can't remain in limbo indefinitely, for our sake or the children's. Greg nodded, studying me with that direct attention that had characterized his approach since Pinnacle's acquisition, the focused regard of someone truly seeing the person before them, rather than a convenient supporting character in their own narrative. These past months working alongside you have been revelatory, he said after our wine had been poured and initial courses ordered. Not just professionally, though that aspect has exceeded any expectations I might have had, but personally as, well, observing daily the capabilities and perspectives I failed to properly acknowledge for years. I sipped my wine, considering his words. The professional partnership has indeed worked well, better than I anticipated when proposing the co-leadership structure. But that's not what I'm really asking about, Greg pressed gently. The business arrangement has been settled by the board's decision today. What I'm asking is whether you believe our marriage can be rebuilt after what's happened, after years of me failing to see you truly, followed by your justified response in acquiring Summit. The direct question deserved equally direct consideration. I thought about our evolution over recent months, not just Greg's changed approach to business leadership, but the gradual shifts in our personal interactions as well. The dismissive husband who had once referred to me as just a simple housewife had been replaced by someone who consistently acknowledged my expertise, built upon my ideas rather than appropriating them, and demonstrated genuine interest in my perspectives beyond their immediate utility to him. I don't know, I admitted finally. The professional changes I've observed in you seem genuine. You've maintained them consistently even as the initial shock of the acquisition faded. But rebuilding trust personally after years of feeling invisible, undervalued? That's more complicated than a 3-month transition plan with metric evaluations. Greg nodded, accepting the honesty of my assessment without defensiveness. That's fair. The damage wasn't created overnight, and it won't be repaired quickly either. He paused as our appetizers arrived, waiting until the server departed before continuing. What would it take, Rebecca? Not promises or declarations, but actual evidence that the changes you've observed professionally would translate to our personal relationship as well. The question caught me off guard with its humility. This wasn't the Greg Wilson who had built Summit Technologies through sheer force of will and unwavering confidence. This was someone capable of genuine self-reflection, of acknowledging past failures without excuses or deflection. Time, I said after careful consideration. Consistent demonstration that you truly see me as a partner rather than an accessory. Evidence that the recognition and respect you've shown professionally wouldn't fade once the structured business environment is removed from the equation. All reasonable requirements, Greg acknowledged. And if I've learned anything, these past months, it's that actions speak louder than assurances. He hesitated, then continued with unusual vulnerability. I miss you. Not just as a convenient domestic support system, but as the partner you've always been. The one I failed to properly appreciate until circumstances forced me to see what was always there. The simple declaration touched something I'd been carefully guarding since discovering his dismissive comments at the Christmas party. I miss aspects of our relationship too, I admitted. But I can't return to being invisible, to having my contributions minimized or dismissed. I wouldn't want you to, Greg assured me earnestly. The woman I've come to know through our professional collaboration these past months, confident, strategically brilliant, unflinching in addressing challenges directly, that's who I want to build a future with if you're willing to consider it. We continued talking through dinner, moving beyond business discussions to address personal expectations, fears, and hopes with a directness that had been missing from our marriage for years. The conversation felt both familiar and entirely new, connecting with the man I'd originally married while acknowledging how fundamentally our relationship had transformed through recent events. As we walked to our separate cars afterward, Greg paused beneath the restaurant's awning. I have a proposal, he said, careful to maintain appropriate distance despite the more personal nature of our evening. Not a solution, but perhaps a beginning. What if we approached rebuilding our personal relationship with the same structured intention we applied to Summit's transition? Clear expectations, regular evaluation, honest feedback on progress? The suggestion, applying business principles to personal reconciliation, should have felt coldly analytical. Instead, it struck me as a genuine attempt to address the trust deficit between us in terms that acknowledged both the wounds caused by his years of dismissal and the effective partnership we'd developed professionally. That's not actually a terrible idea, I acknowledged, a small smile forming despite my lingering reservations. Though I'm not sure relationship reconciliation can be measured with the same metrics as corporate integration. Greg smiled in return, the expression warming his features in ways I'd missed during our months of careful professional collaboration. Perhaps not, but the principles still apply. Clarity about expectations, commitment to continued growth, willingness to address problems directly rather than allowing them to fester. As I drove home that evening, I found myself genuinely contemplating the possibility of reconciliation. Not immediate or unconditional, but gradually rebuilt through the same careful attention and mutual respect that had characterized our professional partnership during Summit's transition. The man who had once dismissed me as just a simple housewife had been transformed through circumstances neither of us would have chosen. Forced to truly see the woman he had married, and the POW capabilities he had long taken for granted. The following weekend brought our first attempt at implementing Greg's proposed approach to rebuilding our personal relationship. After the children had gone to their respective social activities, we sat at the kitchen island with coffee and notepads, the familiar tools of our business meetings repurposed for this far more personal discussion. "This feels strange," I admitted, tapping my pen against blank paper. "Approaching our marriage like a business negotiation." Greg smiled ruefully. "Strange, but perhaps necessary. We've proven we can communicate effectively in professional contexts. Maybe those same frameworks can help us navigate territory where we've struggled previously." There was logic in his reasoning, though the analytical approach to emotional reconciliation still felt somewhat artificial. "Where do we start? With a problem statement? Strategic objectives? Key performance indicators for successful marriage? How about with expectations?" Greg suggested, his tone serious despite my attempt at humor. "What would you need from me, specifically, to consider rebuilding our personal relationship? Not vague assurances, but concrete behaviors and commitments." The directness of the question deserved equally thoughtful response. I considered carefully before answering. Genuine partnership in all aspects of our life together. Active recognition of my capabilities and contributions, not just professionally, but in daily decisions and family matters. Space to pursue my own ambitions without having to justify their importance relative to yours. Greg noted these points carefully. "All reasonable requirements," he acknowledged. "Anything else?" "Yes," I continued, finding unexpected clarity in this structured approach. "Regular communication about important decisions, not just informing me after the fact, but involving me in the process. And public acknowledgement of our equal partnership, not just private recognition." Greg nodded, writing these points as well. "May I ask for clarification on what public acknowledgement would look like in practice? I want to ensure I understand exactly what you're expecting." The question itself represented evolution. Greg I'd known previously would have assumed he understood or dismissed the request as unnecessarily detailed. Introducing me with recognition of my professional identity, not just as my wife. Building on my contributions in group settings rather than restating them as your own ideas. Correcting others when they make assumptions about our respective roles. "Thank you," Greg said simply, adding these specifics to his notes. "That clarity helps." "And you?" I asked, realizing the negotiation needed to address his expectations as well. "What would you need from me to rebuild our relationship?" The question seemed to surprise him slightly, as though he hadn't fully considered his own requirements. "Honestly, patience with my learning curve. I'm unlearning patterns established over years, and I'll make mistakes despite my best intentions. I'd need you to point these out directly rather than withdrawing or assuming bad faith." His answer revealed more self-awareness than I'd anticipated. "That's fair," I acknowledged. "What else?" "Genuine openness to the possibility of reconciliation," he continued after a moment's thought. "Not just going through the motions of this process while having already decided the outcome. And recognition that while I've failed in important ways, there were aspects of our partnership that worked well, foundations we can build upon rather than discarding entirely." I nodded, noting these points with the same care he'd shown mine. "Reasonable requests. Anything else?" "Space to rebuild my identity beyond Summit," he added, surprising me with the personal vulnerability of this admission. The acquisition forced me to recognize how thoroughly I'd defined myself through professional success. I need to develop a more balanced sense of self-worth, and that will require some patience from you as well. The acknowledgement of how deeply his identity had been shaken by Pinnacle's acquisition of Summit touched something unexpected in me. Not pity exactly, but recognition of the genuine transformation he was navigating. This wasn't simply strategic adaptation to changed circumstances, but fundamental reevaluation of how he defined himself and his place in the world. "I can understand that," I said quietly. "My own identity has evolved significantly through establishing Pinnacle and taking on Summit's co-leadership. We're both different people now than when this began." Greg nodded, meeting my gaze directly. "That's precisely what makes reconciliation both challenging and potentially worthwhile. We have the opportunity to build something new together, informed by what we've learned through this upheaval, rather than simply trying to restore what existed before." His perspective resonated more deeply than I'd expected. We weren't trying to repair a broken relationship so much as creating a new partnership between the people we had become through these transformative experiences. "So, what does implementation look like?" I asked, shifting to practical considerations. "How do we measure progress against these expectations?" "Regular check-ins," Greg suggested. "Similar to our transition planning sessions, but focused on our personal relationship. Honest assessment of where we're meeting expectations and where improvement is needed." "And a timeline?" I pressed, needing some structure to this nebulous process. "We can't remain in evaluation mode indefinitely." Greg considered this carefully. 3 months of focused effort, similar to Summit's transition period. Not to force final decisions prematurely, but to provide sufficient data for meaningful assessment of whether reconciliation is genuinely possible. The parallel to our business timeline felt appropriate, giving us sufficient opportunity to evaluate the sustainability of changes while not extending uncertainty indefinitely. "Agreed," I said, finding unexpected comfort in the structured approach. 3 months of intentional effort, beginning today. As we shook hands across the kitchen island, the formality of the gesture at odds with the deeply personal nature of our agreement, I felt cautiously optimistic about the possibility that our professional success might indeed translate to personal reconciliation. The coming months would reveal whether Greg's evolution was genuine and sustainable, whether the man who had once dismissed me as a simple housewife had truly learned to see and value the woman he had married. The week that followed established patterns that would characterize our reconciliation effort. By day, we continued our effective professional partnership, leading Summit's ongoing integration while maintaining the careful boundaries that had defined our workplace collaboration. Evenings and weekends brought more personal interactions, as Greg fully moved back into our home, though still occupying the guest room while we navigated the early stages of potential reconciliation. Emma viewed the arrangement with typical teenage skepticism. "So, you're basically dating your husband while running a company together," she observed dryly over breakfast one morning. "That's not weird at all." "It's unconventional," I acknowledged, amused despite myself by her characterization. "But sometimes the straightest path isn't the most effective one." Tyler, less analytically inclined than his sister, but equally perceptive in his own way, focused on practical outcomes. "Does this mean we're not moving? Or getting separate? Houses? Because Jake's parents got divorced and now he has to switch bedrooms every week, which seems really annoying." "We're not making any permanent decisions yet," I assured him. "Right now, we're focusing on whether your father and I can rebuild our relationship while maintaining our professional partnership." "Cool," he replied with 14-year-old pragmatism, "as long as I don't have to pack my gaming setup into boxes every week." The children's different perspectives on our situation reflected their personalities, Emma analyzing the emotional and logical complexities, Tyler concerned with tangible impacts on his daily life. Both, however, seemed cautiously relieved that we were attempting reconciliation rather than proceeding directly to permanent separation. Greg proved surprisingly committed to the structured approach we'd established, initiating our first formal check-in exactly 1 week after our initial agreement. We settled in the living room after dinner, the children occupied with homework and social media in their respective bedrooms. "I've been tracking specific behaviors related to our agreed expectations," Greg began, his professional approach to personal matters still somewhat disconcerting despite its effectiveness. Would you prefer to start with my self-assessment or your observations? Your assessment first, I suggested, curious about his perception of his own efforts. Greg nodded, consulting notes he'd apparently been keeping throughout the week. I believe I've consistently acknowledged your expertise in professional contexts, building on your contributions rather than restating them as my own. The team meeting on Wednesday provided several opportunities to demonstrate this publicly, which I believe I handled appropriately. His specific reference to the Wednesday meeting, where he had indeed visibly deferred to my technical expertise regarding the platform integration timeline, suggested genuine attention to the behaviors I'd identified as important. I noticed that, I confirmed, it felt natural rather than performative, which is significant. That's encouraging, Greg replied, clearly pleased by this assessment. Regarding family decisions, I've tried to actively involve you in planning rather than simply informing you afterward. The summer vacation discussion with the children, for instance, I deliberately waited until we could address it together rather than responding immediately to their questions. Again, his example referenced a specific interaction I'd noticed, a small but meaningful departure from his previous habit of making family commitments unilaterally and expecting me to accommodate them in our schedule. Areas where I believe I still need improvement, he continued with unexpected self-awareness, include my tendency to interrupt during complex discussions and occasionally defaulting to decision-making without sufficient consultation on matters I perceive as time-sensitive. The acknowledgement of these ongoing challenges, offered without prompting or defensiveness, suggested genuine commitment to the process we'd established. I've noticed both patterns, I agreed, though less frequently than before we began this intentional approach. The conversation continued with similar structured honesty, assessing progress against specific expectations, identifying areas for continued improvement, and acknowledging positive changes where they had occurred. The analytical framework provided safe parameters for discussing emotional territory that might otherwise have been difficult to navigate directly. And your assessment of my adherence to expectations? Greg asked, after we'd thoroughly discussed his efforts. Have I demonstrated sufficient openness to the possibility of reconciliation? Patience with your learning curve regarding new interaction patterns? The question deserved thoughtful consideration. Yes, on both counts, I acknowledged after reflection. You've been consistently receptive to feedback without becoming defensive, and you've demonstrated genuine interest in rebuilding our relationship rather than simply managing the professional complications. Relief flashed briefly across his features. That's encouraging. Any specific areas where you'd like to see different approaches from me in the coming week? The direct invitation to constructive criticism, so different from his previous resistance to feedback, further demonstrated the evolution in his approach to our relationship. More initiative in communications about daily logistics, I suggested. We're still defaulting to me managing most household coordination despite our shared professional responsibilities. Greg nodded, making note of this observation. Valid point. I'll develop better systems for tracking and managing those elements rather than assuming you'll handle them by default. As our first formal check-in concluded, I found myself cautiously optimistic about the potential for genuine reconciliation. The man sitting across from me, thoughtful, receptive to feedback, actively working to identify and modify problematic patterns, bore little resemblance to the dismissive husband who had triggered this entire chain of events with his casual denigration at the Christmas party. Whether these changes would prove sustainable beyond the structured evaluation period remained uncertain, but the initial evidence suggested possibilities I wouldn't have considered when Pinnacle first acquired Summit Technologies. The strategic businesswoman in me remained appropriately cautious, but the woman who had once loved Greg Wilson deeply found herself open to the possibility that perhaps the foundation of our relationship could indeed be rebuilt, stronger and more equitable than before. 6 weeks into our reconciliation effort, paralleling the midpoint evaluation of Summit's transition, Greg and I scheduled a more comprehensive assessment of our progress. The children were spending the weekend with Kate in Colorado Springs, giving us uninterrupted time to honestly evaluate whether our structured approach was creating sustainable improvement in our personal relationship. The data suggests measurable progress across all key metrics, Greg observed as we reviewed our respective notes over morning coffee on our deck, the spring sunshine warming the mountain air. Instances of unilateral decision-making have decreased by approximately 70%, while collaborative problem-solving approaches have correspondingly increased. I smiled at his characteristically analytical framing of our emotional progress. The metrics are indeed encouraging, I agreed, but I'm more interested in your qualitative assessment. How does the relationship feel compared to 6 weeks ago? Compared to before Pinnacle's acquisition of Summit? Greg set aside his notes, giving the question serious consideration. Honestly, it feels more balanced, more genuinely collaborative than at any point in recent years. Working alongside you professionally revealed capabilities I had failed to fully recognize, and that awareness has translated to our personal interactions as well. He paused, his expression thoughtful. I find myself actively seeking your perspective. Now, not just professionally, but personally too. That's a fundamental shift from where we were before. The candid assessment aligned with my own experience of our evolving relationship. I've noticed that shift as well, I acknowledged. You're listening differently, not just waiting for your turn to speak, but actually integrating my viewpoint into collective decisions. And you? Greg asked, genuine curiosity in his expression. Has your experience of our relationship evolved over these weeks, beyond simply observing changes in my behavior? The question deserved equally thoughtful consideration. Yes, I admitted after reflection. I'm less guarded, less constantly vigilant for signs of dismissal or minimization. I've found myself gradually relaxing the protective barriers I built during years of feeling undervalued. Greg nodded, his expression reflecting both satisfaction and regret. That's perhaps the most significant metric of all, that you feel secure enough to lower those defenses even partially. It hasn't been a unilateral effort, I acknowledged fairly. You asked for patience with your learning curve, and I've tried to provide that, to distinguish between patterns of dismissal and simple mistakes or miscommunications. You have, Greg confirmed. You've been remarkably clear in your feedback without the accumulated resentment that characterized our interactions before. That clarity has made growth possible in ways it wouldn't have been otherwise. As we continued our midpoint evaluation, moving from professional assessment to more personal territory, I found myself genuinely reconnecting with aspects of Greg I had always valued. His analytical mind, his determination when committed to a goal, his capacity for growth when properly motivated. These qualities had always been present, but had become directed primarily toward professional achievement rather than personal development or partnership nurturing. Where do we go from here? Greg asked as our conversation reached natural. Conclusion. The remaining 6 weeks of our agreed evaluation period will coincide with Summit's final transition assessment. How do we ensure continued progress on the personal front while managing the professional demands? The same way we've managed thus far, I suggested, by maintaining clear boundaries between work discussions and personal interactions, by using the structured check-ins to ensure we're addressing relationship expectations with the same deliberate intention we bring to business challenges. Greg nodded agreement, though his expression suggested he had more to say. There's another question we haven't directly addressed, he noted carefully, regarding our sleeping arrangements. The subject hung between us, acknowledged but unresolved throughout our weeks of intentional reconciliation efforts. Greg had remained in the guest room, our physical relationship suspended while we focused on rebuilding emotional and intellectual connection. I've been hesitant to raise the issue, he continued when I didn't immediately respond, not wanting to pressure you or suggest that physical intimacy should precede genuine emotional reconnection. but it seems appropriate to at least discuss our thoughts on the matter at this midpoint evaluation. His careful approach, addressing the question as a topic for mutual consideration rather than asserting expectations, further demonstrated the evolution in his perspective on our relationship. "I've been thinking about it too," I admitted. "The physical distance has served a purpose during these weeks of rebuilding trust and establishing new patterns of interaction." "But," Greg prompted gently, correctly reading the qualification in my tone. "But perhaps that separation is becoming artificial," I acknowledged. "If we're genuinely considering reconciliation, physical reconnection is ultimately part of that process." Greg nodded, his expression reflecting careful consideration rather than eagerness. "I agree, though I want to be clear that I'm not suggesting immediate resumption of physical intimacy without continued attention to the emotional foundation we're rebuilding." The thoughtfulness of his approach, prioritizing relationship health over immediate gratification, represented significant evolution from the man who had often treated physical connection as separate from emotional partnership. "Perhaps we could consider transitioning sleeping arrangements while maintaining appropriate boundaries regarding intimacy," I suggested, a step toward normalization without presuming full reconciliation prematurely. "That seems reasonable," Greg agreed. "Gradual rather than binary transition, with continued communication about comfort levels and expectations." As we concluded our midpoint evaluation with this tentative step toward more complete reconciliation, I found myself genuinely optimistic about the possibility of rebuilding our marriage on stronger, more equitable foundation. The man who had once dismissed me as just a simple housewife had been transformed through circumstances neither of us would have chosen, forced to truly see the woman he had married and the capabilities he had long taken for granted. Whether that transformation would prove permanent remained uncertain, but the evidence thus far suggested genuine evolution rather than tactical adaptation, a fundamental shift in perspective that extended beyond our professional partnership to reshape our personal relationship as well. The coming weeks would reveal whether that evolution could sustain the final transition from intentional reconciliation effort to natural, lasting partnership. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.